Travelers actually sued. So Travelers paid out a couple of $1 million to a company based on their policy. They then, through the audit, found out they didn't have two-factor and sued them and won in court to get their money back. So you go back to what Brian said about how does it feel? How would it feel to get hacked, to go through the event, to have all that happen, and then a couple months later have to write a $3 million check back to your insurance company because you didn't have stuff turned on that you were supposed to be, and it was like a couple of the admins didn't have it, right? I mean, it wasn't as a whole. They said they had two-factor, they had it on, but some people had turned it off, and that's what caused the breach. And to expand on that even a little bit more, like, so we do a lot of cyber, and that's what we do, Brian as well, right? We talk about this. So we probably 6 months ago had a client that we do kind of a co-managed thing. So we do a lot of the cyber in the back end, but they have an in-house guy. We said, hey, you need to update your firewall. There's a known vulnerability. And he said, I'll do it later. And we said, hey, you need to update your firewall. There's a known vulnerability. And he said, I'll do it later. And we did that 3 or 4 times. We offered to do it. We said, give us the passwords to it, because we didn't have direct access into that firewall, because it wasn't part of the agreement, but it wasn't part of what they wanted to do. And anyways, long story short, we caught, because we were protecting the servers, we caught somebody across the internet trying to mount network shares and got them disconnected, forced back out the door before anything happened. So they never actually successfully mounted data. They never accessed anything, but we saw that is a breach. That is the panic. That is, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? But because we had the right stuff in place, we're able to move them back out. However, it was preventable. If they had just updated the firmware on the firewall and we told them for the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, never would even happened. And that's the kind of stuff that happens. Same thing, we're dealing with an issue with a rural hospital right now, and it's not even an issue. It looks, as far as we can tell, as a scripted login, but it was the same thing. Somebody, their in-house admin, so again, this is another co-managed thing, decided he didn't want two-factor on for his router login. We're doing the audits. He'd had it off for only a few days, and somebody logged into his account to the router. It looks like nothing's happened. We've checked all the logs. We've done all the things. So again, but if that had gone weeks, bad stuff would happen. So there's a big part of this where you have to have somebody in place. You have to have audits. You have to make sure the things are turned on, because now it's to the point, not just, oh yeah, we turned on two-factor. Oh yeah, we did the thing. Have you audited it? Did you verify it? Was it continued to be turned on? What was the process in that? What did it look like? So that you can go back and fight and go back to Travelers or the court or whatever and say, we have this in place. We do these audits at these timeframes. This is what's happened, and hopefully get it. Get your coverages or whatever it is. But those are the big things that we're seeing a lot of now, that happens. And another, just because this is, I think, high profile that nobody really knows about. But Brian and I are in a group, and we were at a boot camp, I think it was last year, and they had the CEO of Camping World there, and he came in and he was talking about how they had gone through a data breach and how it made him feel was a really, like, he was utterly not prepared for that. They invested in IT, they invested in cybersecurity, they invested in all that, and how it made him feel. He said, like, he lost sleep. It was bad. It was all the other stuff. In that same kind of setting, I heard a story from somebody else who went through a ransomware attack, and the person that clicked the link that let the bad guy in sat in their office for a day crying. Like, do you want your staff to go through that because you didn't feel like it was worthwhile to do cyber or to check it, or it was too expensive, or whatever it is? So there's this whole gambit of things that we often don't think about until you're in the middle of it. But do you want to have to try to go comfort the person that maybe cost you the business? You're probably mad at them, but at the same time, they're going through this significant emotional, thing of, I let the bad guy in. I did the wrong thing. I clicked the wrong thing. And if you didn't have training and these other things in place, a lot of that at the end of the day probably comes back to you didn't help them, and you put them in a position to fail. And as business leaders, none of us want to be there either.